second laptop pulled out. I almost went live on a different computer, but we are good. It's going to be live on YouTube momentarily. Meanwhile, if you're going to use the Chumash we're using in class, we are going to be on page 78 in the live Chumash. Live on a different computer. There we go. Okay, we're live there. Baruch Hashem. We had Spectrum here today, so our internet is back up, but if you want to know what kind of day I had to speak to customer service at Spectrum. If you look at the Saturday Night Live 9-minute clip about that, you'll know why that's not so funny. Just a moment here. I'm sharing it in 2 more places, and we will get going. They do not have any fiber. I lost some fibers in the process of talking to Spectrum, that's for sure. Oh, very good. Okay, copy the link. We're making headway. Baruch Hashem. Stop talking. What's darshansta? What are you saying? Something good, Baruch? When you miss a class, you're supposed to come to the next one sitting quietly like a bubula. What's a bubula? That's the Shilas is asking over here. What's a bubula? Margot, I see your smile. Baruch, Seth wants to know what a bubula is. A teddy bear, a little sweetie pie, a little sheep, a shepsula. Now you can ask me what a shepsula is. You know when you ask a Chabad rabbi, what's tefillin? And they say they want to be fancy, so they say, oh, it's phylacteries. And the Gentile who had the question in the first place now has 2 questions. What's tefillin and what's phylacteries? Okay, I'm going to share this while we get going. Let me make sure everyone that's in is in.
You heard what happened to Chabad in Jamaica?
Yeah, I heard what happened to Chabad in Jamaica. I'm broadcasting live right now, so I won't give you my comments about when the rabbi should have left Jamaica, but we'll do that after the class, but I'm not recording anymore, okay? One moment here. Very good. We are on page 78. So we are in Parshas Lech Lecha. We are in the 3rd portion of the book of Genesis, and we are discussing the first Jew. What's the first Jew? His name is, at that time, his name was Abram or His name wasn't changed yet to Avraham. His name was Avram, and his wife Sarai. And he's having his first, what you would call, direct divine prophetic moment. Now, of course, he had other moments. God told him to go to Israel. But as far as futuristic things versus what you need to do right now, this was the first. He goes into this deep sleep, and there's a whole process. He's cutting up a bunch of animals because there's going to be a bris bein absarim. He's going to go through the half parts of the animal, which back then was a common way in which they would make covenants. And then he falls into a deep sleep. And it's in this deep sleep that God tells him some of the most powerful things about the future of his people, the future of the Jewish people. And if you look on page 78, or I guess in English in 79, it says, verse 12, it says, then when the sun was ready to set, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and look, a great frightening darkness is falling upon him, alluding to the exiles of the Jewish people. And then God said to Abram, you should know that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. They will enslave them and oppress them for 400 years. I will also pronounce judgment, bringing 10 plagues on the nation that they will serve, and afterwards they will leave with substantial wealth. And then he says, before any of this happens, you will come to your forefathers in peace, and you'll be buried in a good old age. And after 3 generations of exile in Egypt, the 4th generation will return here to this land, for the Amorites who currently inhabit the land will not be completely sinful, deserving eviction until then. But when it's time for them to be evicted, the Jews will come out of Egypt. It's a very fascinating set of verses. First of all, God tells Abram something very interesting, that he's going to, that he's not going to live to see it, but he should know that it's going to happen. So, I mean, what do you do with that information? You just found out in this great prophetic moment that your descendants, right? You're the founding father of the Jewish people. You're the one teaching monotheism to the world. You're the one that God has entrusted you and your wife to be the beacons of sanity and goodness in the world. By the way, great news for you. Your descendants will be enslaved and tortured by the Egyptians, but don't worry, eventually they'll come out and come back to this land of Israel when it's the right time, and they'll find redemption. So obviously there's the practical side of it, because if you calculate what the verse just said, they're going to be tortured, and then in the verse it says 400 years. But we were not tortured for 400 years in Egypt. We were tortured, severe slavery for 80 years, and enslavement in general 210 years. So where the other 190 years come from? So Rashi tells us it begins with the birth of Isaac. Abram, when he had this covenant, was 70 years old. He gave birth to Isaac when he was 100. And from that day that Isaac was born, if you look at the verse really closely, you'll see that it's divided up in a way in Hebrew, and even in the translation, it doesn't do that much justice, but if you pay close attention, it says, your descendants will be strangers in a land that's not theirs. They will enslave them and oppress them. It's not all at the same time. There'll be the estrangement time. There'll be the time that you'll just be a stranger, meaning you're not going to have control. And if you look at the life of Isaac, by the way, from when he was born, Abraham had a certain status in the land of Canaan. When he came to buy a plot for his wife Sarah, he got status. He was considered a minister by most of the people there. He had an aristocratic presence in the land of Canaan at the time. Isaac didn't have that. Isaac lived a life, whether it was with Abimelech and other stories, he didn't have the status in the country as some kind of superior entity, as some kind of respected minister. He was mistreated by the neighbors. I mean, he stayed in his quiet little, trying to stay away from action, but he wasn't. He was already a stranger, even in the land of Israel. So from his birth until the Exodus from Egypt, the Jewish people were either strangers, or they were strangers and being tortured and being abused. And by the way, there's an interesting, Ksav Sofer says, one of the commentators, that there's psychological enslavement and there's physical enslavement. And the psychological enslavement for Isaac and Jacob was knowing, because they were the ones that knew that their descendants would end up suffering and having, is everything okay with the pages?
Yeah, I'm just
the knowing that your descendants are going to be enslaved and having to live with that is a form of psychological torture in itself. So that's why we count from Isaac all the way to the end of the Exodus, because there's both physical and psychological enslavement that can exist. I mean, the commentaries discuss this at great length. What did Isaac experience? What did Jacob experience? And when you're in your own land, even if you're in your own land, but you're not in control, you have someone else controlling you. Right? Americans, all the conspiracy theorists walk around the whole day. Who's really controlling America? So one day it's the Jews, the next day it's that group in Switzerland and Davos, the World Economic Forum. Yes, I feel very controlled by the World Economic Forum. Every day I wake up in the morning and Hanalea comes running out of a room and I feel like, oh my gosh, if only the World Economic Forum wasn't disturbing me, everything would be perfect. Right? I'm being sarcastic. That's what's called yeah. Baba Mises, leave me alone. You want to live in your conspiracies, go ahead. I have no patience for it. But the reality is that being in your own land and not being in control, or for example, a good modern example of that would be Israel. Israel's not in control. America tries to control them. Europe tries to control them. This chacham, that chacham, everyone tries to control them. Let them be them. So there's psychological torture, there's psychological enslavement, there's physical enslavement, and God is telling Avram, listen, this is going to be the story of the Jewish people. It's not just the story of the Exodus, the enslavement in Egypt. And that's why in the verse it said, the first verse that we read, he said, the son was safe, fell into a deep sleep, and then it says, frightening darkness fell upon him. And as the Medrash says, those 4 words, those 4 words represent the 4 other exiles. There's the main one, which is Egyptian. The other 4, what are the other 4? So frightening represents the Babylonian exile. I said this in my little clip this week. The darkness represents the Median Persian Empire, which is when we had the story of Purim. But it was a very dark time. We still fast till this very day to commemorate some of that stuff with Queen Esther. And then you have falling upon him. The word Nephelis represents the Greek exile, the story of Antiochus, the Syrian Greeks, and also the spiritual enslavement and suffering that we suffered in the hand of the Greek philosophers and what the churban, the disaster that they brought to humanity with their secularism. Well, the Maccabees were the good ones, but yes, approximately that time. And then, of course, the last word represents the Edomite, the Roman exile, which we are still until today. And so God was telling Abraham, listen here, I need you to know as the founding father of the Jewish people how things are going to work out. And this is how it's going to work out. There's going to be a lot of suffering. There's going to be this exile, and that problem, and that problem. There's going to be psychological warfare. There's going to be physical torture. Sometimes there'll be multiple forms of enslavement simultaneously. But listen here. Here's the end game. This is what the enemies of the Jewish people don't like to hear. But the Jewish people are going to be fine. We're going to get through it, and we're going to end up, we're going to end up in the land of Israel. Right? You see all these clips with these geniuses, these Muslims being interviewed. They say, there's no such thing as Israel. So the interviewer says to them, okay, how many times does it mention Palestine in the Quran? Not once. How many times does it mention Israel? And they're so ignorant, they say no. By the way, it's not only Jews that are ignorant. People of other religions are ignorant too. Say, how many times say Israel? No, never. So what are you talking about? And he starts quoting, here in the Quran, there in the Quran, B'nai Israel, it mentions Israel all the time. Actually, he speaks about Israel, the land of Israel belonging to the Israelites. So the first thing we need to know is that no matter what they do to us, whether it's psychological, physical, and sometimes, unfortunately, even spiritual, because spiritual is the ultimate. The worst thing you can do to a Jew is mess with their spirituality. You can kill the Jew physically, it's not the end of the world. You can torture a Jew physically, it's not the end of the world. You can torture a Jew psychologically, it's still not the end of the world. The end of the world, the worst thing you can ever do to a Jew is torture them spiritually, keep them away from their relationship with Hashem. Either by forcing them by force to deny their faith in Hashem, or even worse, maybe, is to secularize them and take them away from God and sort of in the hip way. You can't be serious that in 2025 you would still fast on Yom Kippur. Yeah, I could. Come on, they do that. Come on, like to try to make you sound like you're the foolish one.
Come on, man.
I'm like, listen, that's a Joe Biden issue. I'm not talking about Joe Biden. I'm just talking about the come on, that whole. Oh my gosh, you can't be one of those. Said by the person with green hair and 3 belly button rings, telling me that I'm the weirdo. So that's the first part of it. The first part of it is that a Jew needs to recognize what we are to expect. Abraham needs to know that. Isaac knew it, Jacob knew it, we all knew it, and we need to know that it's part of the trajectory of our people. It's not a fun thing to know. It definitely wasn't fun for Abraham to know, like, what did I sign up for? This is what I get for finding God? Right? Who was Abraham? Abraham was the guy who the Medrash tells us at the age of, depending on which Medrash, there's 3 opinions, if he was a younger boy, if he was a young boy, or if he was a teenager, or some say I think he was 20, but let's even accept the opinion that says he was 40. When he walked around and looked at the galaxies and looked at the sky and said, this cannot have happened on its own. The whole world. Like, oh no. I know the scientists think that they're big novel. Back in the day, they all thought the same thing, that there had to be some other thing that happened. There wasn't a God, right? They were pagans. And Abraham was the one that stood up against the whole world and said, no, there's a God. There has to be a God that created this ex nihilo. Ex nihilo is as good as telling someone phylacteries. You know what ex nihilo means?
Out of nothing.
Something from nothing. There's nothing in this world that a human being can create. There's no human being on earth that can create anything ex nihilo. Only God can create ex nihilo. Because he's omnipotent, he's omnipresent, and he's omniscient, and therefore he's capable of creating something ex nihilo. Avraham Avinu recognized that. And what does he get? Less than 40 years later, God says, here, I want to give you a great revelation. You're going to be the founding father of this great nation. Your wife, Sarah, is going to be the founding mother of this great nation. And here's the great thing you need to know about your nation. You're going to suffer a lot. The world's going to hate you, which is the same thing. God is telling Abraham, right, because you wouldn't suffer if the world didn't hate you. They're going to mistreat you. They're going to abuse you psychologically, physically, spiritually. Greeks, Babylonians, Medians, Persians, Romans, Egyptians, and you're going to end up back in the land of Israel. But here's where it gets just a little bit more interesting. We say in the Haggadah on Passover a very interesting statement. In Passover, right, the entire Haggadah is about the story of the Exodus, but because it's about the Exodus, we talk about how we ended up there in the first place. So it obviously goes back to this covenant that Abraham had with God. And so there's an interesting statement that it says in the Haggadah. In the Haggadah it says, and I quote, if God had not taken our ancestors out of Egypt, us and our children and our children's children would still be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. Why is that a problem? Think about what I just said prior to the statement. What did God tell Abraham? How long are we going to be in suffering in Egypt? Max 400 years. So how could we say in the Haggadah that we would still be in Egypt as if God promised we'd be out after maximum 400 years, which means we were out 3,000 years ago. So what does it mean when we say we'd still be there? Of course we wouldn't be there. God told Abraham we'd never be there more than 400 years. So why would we say in the Haggadah that we would still be there? Me and my children and my grand. What are you talking about? By the way, there's just I don't want someone to question and then say, oh, the rabbi's throwing you. In the Torah, it says when the Jews left Egypt that they were a total of 430 years. So we have 210 years, and there's 400 years and 430. So I just want to clear that up. 430 begins from when God made the covenant with Abraham. He was 70 years old. He didn't give birth to Isaac he didn't have Isaac until he was 100. And the 100, that once he gave birth to Isaac, that's where it started the 400-year counting. So there was a 30 years extra starting from when the covenant happened. But going back to the question, which is it? Are we for sure going to be out of Egypt because God pledged we're going to be out of Egypt maximum of the 400 years? Or would we still be in Egypt because we're just a bunch of lousy people that would still be stuck in Egypt? God would have not taken us out.
Well, would have been for one thing, it probably would have been another.
But if God promised that we would be out by this deadline, why would we say in the Haggadah that we would still be there? It's a fascinating question because we read it in the Haggadah. I'm 43, so I've been reading it at least from what I can remember, at least 35 years. Probably reading it longer, but 35 years that I could understand it, and yet I never thought of it. And when I read the Rebbe's explanation, I'm like, mind-blowing. Mind-blowing because when you study Torah, and then you realize how relevant it is to your life today and how the world operates today, you're like, wow. So the Rebbe says as follows. If God would have kept his promise, what was God's promise? To get us out of there, right? It wouldn't stop us from going back. I kept my promise. I made sure the Egyptians are not enslaving you anymore. You're free to go. After 400 years, you are free to go. Can't stop you from going back. And not only that, they're what we call today Stockholm Syndrome. Oh, yeah. This is what the Rebbe is saying. The Rebbe is saying this decades ago. They would have gone back by their free choice. Like those slaves in the book of Exodus, you know what it says? They finished their 6 years of being a slave and they want to stay for another year, and then you pierce a hole through their ear by the doorpost and say, you know, God told you not to be a slave to anyone else and you're choosing to be a slave. Even when your time to go free comes, Stockholm Syndrome tells you, let's go back to Egypt. Right? Battered wife syndrome. Go do the survey yourself. I'm a rabbi. I'm in public service enough to know how many times a woman who could be beaten is not sure. Rabbi, maybe it was just a one-time thing. I think I should go back. You walk through that door. Don't call me tomorrow. No, don't call me today. They all call tomorrow. Don't worry. You could tell them not to call tomorrow. They still call tomorrow. But my point is, why would someone go back? Because in some weird way, that wasn't really a question. In some weird way, there's a certain comfort in going back to the trouble, even if you know it's trouble, because it's the trouble that you know. You're comforted because it's the sorrows that you know. So God said, I'll take you out of Egypt, but if the Jews would have wanted and their natural instincts would have kicked in, they for sure would have gone back. How do we know that? Look at what they told Moses in the desert. How many times did they tell Moses? We remember the fish that we had in Egypt and we ate for free. We remember where's the zucchinis and the onions? Where's the leek and the garlic? Where's the watermelons? They were fetching. They're sitting in the Sinai desert getting manna from heaven, and they're asking about the watermelon and the zucchini. And how many times they tell Moshe we should go back to Egypt? Why'd you take us out of the desert of Egypt so we should die in the desert? But they're standing by the sea. What did they tell Moshe? There was a whole group of them that said, why did you take us out to die in the desert? They were in Egypt for so long and suffered so much by the Egyptians, both physically but also spiritually. They were so sunk into the spiritual dysfunctionality of Egypt. They felt so low of themselves. Their self-esteem was in the toilet. But why wouldn't it be? They watched their babies being used as cement. They watched the other babies thrown into the river. They watched their lives torn apart. Spiritually, it was a land of idolatry. So yes, we had 10 plagues, and at the end, we got out at the last moment. But psychologically, they would go back in a heartbeat. And that's what it means when we say in the Haggadah. What does it mean? God took us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm, with a strong hand. Right? God did it with a strong hand against our will. We weren't sure. There were Jews that, right? Remember, a fifth of the Jews didn't even come out. They died in the plague of darkness. They weren't interested. We're good. This is where it's at. Just get used to it. I was watching a documentary, listening to a documentary this week about, no one talks about it because there's no Jews involved, but the Eritreans fighting the Ethiopians. There's one region there in northern Ethiopia that borders with Eritrea, which, by the way, Eritrea and Ethiopia used to be one country. They're all the same people. But they broke it into two countries. Let's have a war. 600,000 people murdered from 2018 to 2022. How many of you ever heard of that? None. Why? No Jews involved. It's not news. 600,000 black on black, Ethiopian on Eritrean genocide. Not a peep. No one even knows where you can find Ethiopia on a map, even though it's 2,000 times the size of Israel. Not a peep. Not on MSNBC, not on Fox, not on CNN. People get used to a lifestyle under tyrannical leadership, and they just don't know how to get out of it. By the way, there's a whole bunch of Eritreans that live in Israel, which is its own challenge. They escaped through Sudan and came to Israel, and some of them really acclimated, some of them really didn't. And in certain parts of Tel Aviv, it's not so because of the Eritreans that came there, but that's a separate conversation. Tyrannical communism. I know we have a communist about to become the mayor of New York. Sein gesund. May have a wonderful time. Maybe I'll go to New York with a bodyguard next time I go. But the point is, I'll go to the oil. I'll land in JFK. I'll wait for security to pick me up so I can get out of communist New York. But think about it. People that live under a dictatorship, under a tyrannical government, under communism, socialism, whatever, fascism, whatever famous fancy words you want to use, you forget after a while what freedom looks like. You become desensitized. So what do you want to do? You don't want to get free. You want to stay in the cushion of, what's his name? Lushenko in Belarus. He's been the president for 200 years already. He's like a mummy already. And you get used to it. And the you don't know how to get out. So God comes to Egypt and says, guys, I know you don't want to go out. You don't even know what freedom looks like. You don't know what freedom sounds like. I'm going to take you by force out of Egypt because I promised Abraham that you guys are not going to suffer there any longer than 400 years. But if he would have just not forced us out, right? Imagine if God says, you know what? The Egyptians won't punish you anymore, but the gates are open. Leave at your own free will. Who do you think would leave? The same people that 15 minutes later were fetching about the watermelon? They would have stayed or they would have gone back, because sometimes you need God to push you in the direction of freedom, to push you in the direction of growth, because if it was up to us, we get comfortable with where we are and we'd never free ourselves to go to the next level. Some people think that freedom is good enough when it's freedom from. I'm free from tyrannical government. I get to vote. I get to drive my car. I could go all 50 states and I can carry my guns, whatever freedom means. It's not freedom of anything. That's freedom from tyrannical governments. Freedom of means you're internally free. You're not a status quo, entity that doesn't grow. Even trees grow. What happens when the tree stops growing? What happens when the plant in your house stops growing? What do they say? Oh my gosh, the plant died of blessed memory. What happens when a person stops growing? Of blessed memory. Sei gesund. Right? There's no life there. And Hashem wanted to ensure that not just that he promised us that we wouldn't leave Egypt, but the Haggadah is telling us, if God had not forced us out of Egypt, we would still be there. Not because we'd be forced, because unfortunately, we would have chosen that path. And too often, and we're all, there's no one that's exempt from this, there's no one that's free of this problem. Too often, we look at the prospects of growth, of what it entails, of what work it will mean, especially if it's internal growth. Oh, the hardest growth. Every other growth, but the internal growth is the hardest. And you say, you know what, I can't. It's too much work. Right? You tell an addict, no more drugs. He goes, I can't. What do you mean? I've been smoking pot like Bill Maher for 40 years. Tell a guy, no more pornography. Can't. Sorry, Rabbi. Can't. I've been doing it for, I don't know when the pornography started, 30 years ago. Internet pornography. I'm not talking about your magazines. I'm talking about internet. 30 years, 25 years, whatever, however long the internet's been. I can't, Rabbi, I can't. I need my dose. And then pick your choice. Rabbi, I really, really believe I should keep kosher. I can't let go of my cheeseburger. I can't let go of my
Shrimp cocktail.
Shrimp cocktail. An alcoholic. I can't. The whole day because it's hard work to change. There's nothing more rewarding in the world. There's nothing more rewarding in the world than inner change, but it's the hardest thing in the world. And sometimes you get it, and then you have to change your way. You know, you make headway, and then you fall back, and then you grow, and then you fall back. It's part of the journey. I've been on a diet for 43 years. I know. If my diets were successful, then I wouldn't have to be on it for 43 years. And yet here we are. And then you change the name. You say, you know what? I'm not on a diet. Diets are not good. It's a new way of living. It's a lifestyle change. And you know what? I've been on those too for my whole life. I've been on diets and lifestyle change. And guess what? Here we are. And I still don't give up. I don't give up ever. Take a day. You get a day that's a win. It's a win. Spiritually, it's no different. Because if it was up to our natural instincts, we laid back. How do they do it in Miami? You put on a kurtze hazen, you put on short pants, you wear shorts the whole day, you put on flip-flops, and you walk around, I'm good. I do every day. I go to the beach for 3 hours and read a book, and then I go 3 hours and I play pool, and then 3 hours and I go swimming, and 3 hours I go to the sauna, and by the time I get gagging, my day's over. Sounds like fun, right? But people think that's retired, and it's not. Retired? No, you're wrong. Absolutely not. Maybe you can set 2 hours a day to do that, as long as there's meaning and there's productivity and there's growth, and I want to be a better person. I was speaking to Mick about it yesterday. There's people that turn on the TV in the morning, and it stays on the whole day. The news is going. Especially if you go to retirement homes, forget about it. The whole day. So you retired after a whole life, and you have to suffer the whole day and listen to miserable news. You go to the kitchen to make a sandwich, you took a 4-minute break, and then you go right back to eat your sandwich in front of the TV. And you want to know why America's all popping pills. For that kind of misery, why wouldn't you be popping pills? It's our job to look at the story of our ancestors and ask ourselves, are we making the same mistakes? Or are we doing better? Are we getting the memo or are we not? And the memo tells us that God took us by force out of Egypt, because sometimes if we're not taken out by force, we go right back to where it all started, even if it's absolutely miserable. And so as we study Parshas Lech Lecha, we wonder why the Jews would still be in Egypt. It's because we would make the choice to be in Egypt. And for most of us, Egypt is a choice. Because we live in America. We don't live in Turkmenistan. We don't live in North Korea. We don't live in Eritrea. We don't live in Bosnia. We live in America. We are free to be devoted, vibrant Jews connected to God. Jews talk about anti-Semitism as a cop-out. They'd rather talk about the one that hates them on the outside than talk about the one making their spiritual life miserable from the inside. I'm not saying there's no anti-Semitism. There is. But that's not our main problem. Our main problem is the anti-Semite within each of us that takes us off our relationship with Hashem and convinces us that, oh, you're great, everything's phenomenal. Instead of saying, yeah, yesterday was great, but you need to grow because you don't want to get stuck in Egypt. You don't want to get stuck in yesterday's bondage. You don't want to get stuck in yesterday's limitation. You want to grow infinitely compared to where you were yesterday. The Gemara says that anyone that has $200 wants 400. And whoever has 400 wants 800. Meaning, when it comes to money, you never meet someone that says, I made 40 grand this year, and even though my company could have made 80, I'm happy with 40. You meet people that will say, I made 40 grand a year and I'm grateful, for sure. But you don't meet someone who has the ability to make 100 by doing whatever, but I made 40, I decided to close up shop. It's not true. The natural instinct of a human being is to always want more, to always grow more. But it takes work. And so this message is for me tonight as much as it's for you. There are some days that I, not forget about my internal stuff, I'll keep the internal stuff internal. But there are times, I'm doing this big campaign now for the future of Chabad, of Yiddishkeit in Montana. It's not even about Chabad, it's about Yiddishkeit in Montana. Sometimes I ask myself, am I out of my mind? It's insane work. The growth has to happen. Do I have to do it? Could we hire someone else to do it? I don't know. There's a lot of questions I have. I believe in it 1,000%, but that, you need to breathe. And then I give a class like this and I'm stuck because I just gave a whole class that says, you got to grow. Yesterday's success, yesterday's growth is great. That was only for yesterday. It has nothing to do with tomorrow and has nothing to do with today. So l'chaim to our growth as a community, but l'chaim to each of your growth, that as you feel like, I'm doing okay, that is your evil inclination trying to get you off a growth-oriented perspective, a growth-oriented mindset of being a better individual, a holier individual, a more meaningful individual going into tomorrow, because we don't want to get stuck in Egypt, because as cool as it may sound on paper and as comforting as it may sound to get the watermelon, when Pharaoh's the one giving you the watermelon, there's much better options that you don't, if you can get manna from God in the desert, don't suffice with Pharaoh's watermelon, even if it seems delicious and tempting. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you.